Good morning, Morgan, family and friends, and welcome to video 4. Let me get this frog out of my throat so you won't have to endure that scratchiness. This is video number 4, the family of Melinda Langford Morgan. And I'll warn you right up front, this is probably going to be the longest video, and I'm not going to rush through it because there's too much. So if you just get weary, all you have to do is turn it off, and you can come back later and kind of bite it off in little chunks. But I've been kind of pushing and going too fast. And what happens when I do that, those little areas in my brain which are empty either derail me or they impede what I really want to say. You know, I had a little heart attack 6 years ago, and on the cath lab table, I had a little stroke, and it was very, very minor. It really just affected my memory and processing. I reverse things. I do reversals. When I type, I have to proofread everything I type because I reverse things. I leave words out of sentences a lot when I write, and so I do that when I speak too. I'll get in a big hurry speaking, and my brain will hit one of those empty pockets, and I don't know that it's done it, and it's empty. So I'm empty-headed, but I'm going to need to slow down because there's so much in today's video. I cannot go fast with it. There's several lines in this Langford line. We're going to look at Melinda Evelyn Langford's line, the wife of Will Morgan. So we're still doing the Morgans. Remember, we've got maybe 1 or 2 more Morgan videos because some of the lines in Delvin Morgan's line, they stop pretty early. We don't really have any information past 1 or 2 more generations on a few of the lines. We're still looking, and when we find it, we'll make a video for it. But right now, we don't have a lot. So 1 or 2 more videos for the Morgans, and then I'm going to go to the Brookshires, and there's a whole lot for the Brookshire line. So we'll just chunk them out one at a time, and you can listen to them a little bit alone. So today we're looking at Melinda Evelyn Langford and her allied families. And this is going to take us to the Civil War again, because Melinda's dad was a Civil War veteran, Joab Langford. And then you take 1 or 2 of those lines from Melinda, and they take us to colonial Williamsburg, where you had a lot of ancestors in the early days of Williamsburg. It's a lot to tell. And Jamestown, the first permanent English settlement in the New World. You may remember from your history class, I hope you do, from your history class that wasn't the first English people in North America. You know, there were English settlers along the coast of North Carolina. You've heard of the Lost Colony, Virginia Dare and Sir Walter Raleigh, but they didn't have a permanent settlement. Actually, they disappeared. But the first permanent English settlement that took hold was 1607 in Jamestown, Virginia. And hopefully you studied that in high school, and maybe this video will be a little impetus for you that you'll want to go learn a little more about Jamestown. Some of you may have been there. It's a wonderful place. Go visit it if you haven't been. You can see how your ancestors lived, because you had ancestors there and collateral ancestors from the very beginning in 1607. And I'm going to work up the line today to that, and we're going to start down and go up several times. And remember, the family tree is easy to find online. I posted some WikiTree links. Now I'm going to tell you this, some of the WikiTree lines don't go this far. And I'm going to try to work on that over the next few days, but I'm going to talk you up there if you stay with me a little bit. It's a whole lot. So we're going to go back to Melinda Evelyn Langford. This is Delvin Morgan's grandmother. Some of you older ones will remember her. She's the lady who looks scary sitting in the rocking chair. That's Melinda Evelyn Langford. She lived till 1933. And you know, I really need my I'm gonna put up some. I'll put up some pictures on the Facebook group instead of holding up my pad and showing them to you. I'll just tell you that I'm gonna put some pictures from Williamsburg when Donna and I were up there about 3 years ago in the House of Burgesses, because you had ancestors who served in the House of Burgesses in both Jamestown and Williamsburg. So I'm gonna put up some pictures so you can see, and I'll put up Joab Langford and his wife Matilda Roper. Those pictures I think they're already on the Facebook page group. And I don't think I can post pictures below on YouTube. But if you're watching this and somebody's got you to YouTube, I know some of you don't like Facebook and you don't want to be on it. But if you can go get in the Morgan Brookshire family group on Facebook, we've got stuff on there. We're going to put more and more, and I'd love for you to see it also. I really do encourage you to, if you haven't been using Facebook, it won't bite you. And it's crazy. Facebook's crazy. You might not want to stay on it all the time, but to go to that group, it's worth it for you to sign up. And you say, well, I don't want them knowing my business. Okay, well, you won't be able to see it. I don't know that they care about our business, but it's a private group. Not just anybody can see what we post, and not just anybody can get in. So if you're worried about privacy, it is a private group on Facebook. As far as that means to Facebook, they can see it, but other people can't. So I want you to see these things that were posted, and that's the only way I know to do it. I don't know any other way. You can send me an email, and I'll email you some stuff. My email is ERH, my initials, ERH @carolina.rr.com. So if you just don't want to go on Facebook and you say, I really would like to see Joab Langford's picture, then send me an email and I'll send it to you. Okay. So let's go back to our chart. Let me put my specs on, and we're going back to Melinda Evelyn Langford, and I'm going to be looking at my chart, which I have right next to me because I really have to have it for this. Want to apologize for the busyness back there. I had to angle this the best way I could. I still can't get that light shining off my head. I hope that's not blinding you. And it was really shining off the TV, so I had to cover that with a towel. Pardon all my wires and everything, all my junk on my bulletin board. I don't keep it neat and nice like Barney Fife did on Andy Griffith, so I'm sorry about that. But anyway, pardon the busyness. Go ahead and look at all of it now and see if you can figure out what it is. That's my Ronald Reagan calendar back there. I always put up a Reagan calendar. I get one every year from the Reagan Library because we donated a little bit when they were opening all that up. And so actually the ranch, we donated to preserve the ranch, and just a little bit. And they send us a calendar every year. So that's Ronnie back there. And stuff I have to remember. I have to stick notes up everywhere, or I can't remember anything because I keep hitting those holes up in there. But you know how it is. All right, we're back at Melinda Evelyn Langford, who was the mother of George Felix Morgan and the wife of Will Morgan. She was the grandmother of Delvin Morgan. So we're looking at her line today. And Melinda was born about 1843 in South Carolina. They were from Lower District, South Carolina, kind of like Greenville, Pendleton, over in that area. And she died in 1933. She's buried at Deep Springs Church Cemetery in Dalton, Georgia. And she's the one that went out to Texas with Will. And, after he died, she came back and stayed in Georgia. And what I went through all the census records from 1850 to 1930 to see where they were every 10 years. So let me just tell you where they were at. In 1850, of course, she was a child, and she was living with her parents, Joab and Matilda, and they were living in Forsyth County, Georgia. It was mom and dad, Joab and Matilda, and she had 2 siblings at that time. By 1860, they were living in Murray County, Georgia, which is next door to Whitfield, next door to Dalton. And she's still a child, and she's living with her parents and her brothers and sisters. And then that's right before the Civil War. And of course, when the Civil War breaks out, Joab joins the Confederate infantry, and he is in first in the 16th Regiment of the South Carolina Infantry, and then they combine it with the 24th. So if you look up some of his records, you'll find him under the 16th and the 24th, and they eventually combined into one, the South Carolina Infantry. And he has some records. If you've ever been on a website called Fold 3, the number 3, fold3.com, that's a military record site. Now, usually you have to have a subscription to go there, but a lot of libraries have digital access. If you have a library card, I know my county has access through my library card. So I can go to my county library website, click on their online database things. Most counties have a whole list of stuff you can access online with your library card, and go to Fold 3 under that at my library page and put in my library card number, and I can get out to all of Fold 3 for free. Actually, it's not for free. Your tax money pays for it. But the library chooses to use some of your tax money to give you access to it. So you may be able to, I don't know if Guilford County or some of your counties in Georgia, check with your library and say, do y'all have Fold 3 access for card holders? And if they don't, there might be a way for you to get on anyway, but I won't put, this is a public video right here that anybody can access. But if you can't get on it, let me know, and I'll help you get on it somehow. Okay, you get it? So he joins the Civil War and survives it, thank God. So many didn't. And by 1870, they're back in Murray County, Georgia. He's back. And Matilda still has not married Will Morgan yet, and they're living in Murray County, and they also have 2 nieces that are living with them for some reason. I don't know if maybe a parent got killed in the war. I need to find out why those nieces were living there. But by the time we get to 1880 census, Melinda, see how that brain's working? Melinda is Melinda Morgan by this time in 1880, and they're still in Georgia. They're still in Murray County, next door to Whitfield. And it's Melinda and Will and 5 kids, and Will's brother, younger brother, is living with them. I think his name was James. Now, George Felix Morgan is born in Georgia in 1889. Sometime after 1889, sometime in the 1890s, that's when they go to Texas. You know, I told you Will had a lot of brothers and sisters, and about half of them went to Texas and half of them stayed in Georgia. So it's in the 1890s that they go out west. They go to Texas, and I told you the reason for that was opportunity, economic opportunity, and trying to tap into resources. They were paying Confederate pensions. The state of Texas was. And then some of them went on to Oklahoma to try to get Cherokee citizenship. And we talked about that in a previous video. We've got many of the records where they testified. We have the written documents where your family testified trying to get enrolled in the Cherokee, and some tried to get in the Choctaw Nation, but they weren't Choctaw. They didn't get in. And we said the reason they didn't is because they didn't have previous ancestors on the roll before the Trail of Tears to the Cherokee Nation, because your Cherokees intermarried with European ancestry people and lived like white people. They didn't live like Indians. Everybody knew they were Indians, but they lived like white people for a variety of reasons, which we already discussed. Now, by 1900, Melinda Evelyn Langford Morgan is back in Georgia, and she's listed as a widow on the 1900 census. You say, well, when did Will die? Remember, and on the Morgan video, we said we don't know. There's a mystery around all of that. We don't know if he died early or late, but I in studying this week, I really think that Will died in 1902. And I think he's buried in Childress, Texas, at the Childress Cemetery. And I'm going to tell you why. There's a William Morgan buried there, and it says birth date unknown. Why it would say that, I don't know. Death date, it gives a specific date, month and day, and 1902. And you know who else is buried in that cemetery? His brother, Charles Allen Morgan, is buried there, and some of his nieces and nephews. I did send an email to the town of Childress to ask them if they had any burial records. I know one researcher called the city of Childress, and whoever they talked to said, we don't have any records. We had a fire here some years back, and a lot of those early records were gone. But maybe I'll hear back. I sure wish I could get out there and snoop around a little bit. I don't know if Will has a tombstone. The person who put it on findagrave.com did not indicate if there's a tombstone. The person just put the information, and I sent that person an email and said, did you actually see this grave, or where did you get this information that this William Morgan is buried there, and how do you know they died on this date in 1902? And she hasn't gotten back to me, but I was told by a researcher that she's been very sick, so I'm sure that's why. But it seems logical to me. You can't find anybody who died during that time period anywhere, and his brothers. But his brother died in 1927. So his brother, it looks to me like there's got to be some kin people out around Childress, Texas, that know something. So I'm not stopping. I'm still looking. But anyway, Will died somewhere in Texas. Melinda told people that he froze to death in Waco. And I've already told you we can't find any record of that anywhere. So I don't know. We're still wondering where the African-American line that we've discovered through DNA that we know comes from another area, not Georgia specifically. It comes from west. We're still trying to figure out what happened there. So the bottom line is we don't know for sure, but he didn't come back from Georgia. And Melinda told everybody that she was a widow, and she might have done that to save face, or it was just too hard to discuss it with people and explain it to people. We don't know what went on. She said he drank, and it could have, bad things happen. Alcohol usually doesn't have a good result when people don't tolerate it well. Might have been some bad things. We just don't know, but we'll keep looking to see what we can find. So she's back in Whitfield with her son Marcus and his wife Lula, and in the 1900 census. And in 1910, she's in Whitfield, and she's living with George Felix Morgan, and his wife Ella Manus. So in 1910, Melinda, let me get it right now. 1910, Melinda's living with George and Ella. And Delvin is there. He's a baby. And James and Owens from Texas. I told you on the Morgan video that there was a man named James Owens that came back with them from Texas. And he was a boarder and lived with them. And I still can't find out what happened to James or who he was. Does anybody know who James Owens from Texas was that came back out with Melinda Morgan and her family and lived with them in Georgia? And did he die in Georgia? Is he buried there? James Owens from Texas. I believe he was about 55 years old in 1910 when he was living with them. He was listed as a farmhand. I sure would like to know. By 1920, she's still living with George and Ella in Whitfield. And 1930, she's still living with George and Ella in Whitfield. And then she dies in 1933, and she's buried at Deep Springs Church. So that's the chronology that we have from 1850 to 1933, basically. Her father, Joab, was born in 1816 and died in 1888. He's buried at Marietta First Baptist Church in Greenville County, South Carolina. They were his family, Langford family, came from Virginia, like most of your ancestors did, to that part of South Carolina. Let me look at my notes a minute. Joab's father was Henry Langford, who was born in 1781 in Virginia, and his mother was Tabitha Clardy. We don't know much about the Langfords. We don't have anything definitive past Joab's father. There's some speculation. You'll see it if you go look at the Langford trees online in different places, but I've not seen any documentation beyond Henry that he was that they did come from the same area of Virginia that everybody else came from. And it could be that the line has been there since the 1600s, but we haven't proven it yet. So Joab's family came from Virginia after the war, Revolutionary War, to South Carolina. And Joab, as I've already told you, fought in the Civil War, died in 1888, buried at Marietta First Baptist Church right outside of Greenville, South Carolina. You could make a day trip down there if you wanted to go visit his grave. We do have he and his wife Matilda's picture, and I've shown it to you, and it's on the Facebook page. And I don't have my iPad booted up, so I can't show you the pictures today, but they're easy to find. What I want to do today is really focus on Joab's mother, Tabitha Clardy Langford. Tabitha Clardy's ancestry goes back to Belgium. Her people were what are called Walloons. The Walloons were a people group, still are. They're still Walloons in Belgium. There's probably about a little over 3 million people in Belgium that are of Walloon ancestry. And what they were French speaking. Actually, they had their own dialect. The Walloon dialect is basically French, but it's a little bit different. And they were Protestants. After the Protestant Reformation, they became Protestant. And their history in a nutshell, you can research them if you want to know more. Their history in a nutshell is Spain invaded the Netherlands to try to bring the Netherlands. I'm sorry, let me get you from Belgium to the Netherlands. The Walloons left Belgium because the northern part was primarily Catholic and the southern part was Protestant. There was conflict all over Europe between Protestantism and Catholicism after the Reformation in the 1500s. Some of the Walloons left and went into Holland. And then when the Spanish king, who was Catholic, invaded the Netherlands and southern Belgium, the low country area, they were determined to bring all those Protestant areas back into Catholicism, and there was lots of fighting and lots of danger and lots of discrimination. So many of the Protestants left Holland, went to England. And many of the Walloons left from Belgium to Holland to England, and from England eventually to the New World in America. And these Walloons that you are descended from, their name was Clit-Dieu, which eventually became Anglicanized to Clardy. And the Clit-Dieu, who were the Clit-Dieu in Belgium and Holland, became the Clardies in the New World. They came to Virginia in 1621, your Clardy ancestors. The man who immigrated, the head of the family, was Francois Clit-Dieu, who became Frank Clardy. And that is where they came from, 1621. You can find the immigration record. They came to Virginia. Remember, in an earlier video, we talked about your Huguenot ancestry. You have Huguenots from France who left for religious reasons and came to the New World, and they Anglicanized their names. They changed their French-sounding names to English names because it's easier to live in society that way. And people used to assimilate when they came to America, and they became, English in their speech and in their names. I have a friend who immigrated back in the 80s from Egypt, and he Anglicanized his Arabic name to English because he said, I'm in America now. I'm an American. So he changed his name from Girgis Gali to George Gali. He said, I want an American name. People used to value that. That's all I'll say about that. So anyway, this is where the Clardies come from, and this is where I need to slow down and take my time. And let me look at my chart here and tell you again where we're going. We're going from Delvin Morgan to his father, George Felix Morgan, to his mother, Melinda Evelyn Langford, to his father, Joab Langford, to his mother, Tabitha Clardy. Now, I do realize I skipped Joab Langford's wife, Matilda Roper, and there's some things to talk about there, and I'll try to come back to that later. I'll try to remember to come back, but I really want to get to the Clardies because that's where I've got several lines, so try to stay with me if you can. And I'm going to try to make this as easy as possible. Tabitha Clardy married Henry Langford. And Tabitha was born, we don't really know. We think about 1801. She died in 1862. And her father was Elliot Clardy, and her mother was Nancy Ann Ferris, Farris. You ever heard that name in your family line, Ferris? Yeah, you got it. So Tabitha's dad was Elliot Clardy. He was born in I believe about 1780. He died in 1843. We have his will on record. I will try to post that on the Facebook page, The Will of Elliot Clardy. That's how we know who his daughter was, because he names her in there. And so Elliot Clardy's father was John Bradford Clardy, and he married his first cousin, Mary Clardy, which was not unusual at all. Back in those days, I've got several family lines that married cousins. There weren't quite as many people to choose from to get married. And I guarantee you, some of you listening to me, you're married to your cousin and you don't know it. Donna and I are cousins several times over, but it's many, many, many generations back because our families came from the same area. And when I started looking at my ancestry and her ancestry in colonial Virginia, we had people that we have the same ancestors on several lines, which makes us cousins. You ever heard that song, I'm my own grandpa? Well, it's true. It really is true. There's a lot of truth to that. But Mary Clardy and John Bradford Clardy were cousins. And let me talk about John Bradford's line first, because his dad was John Henry Clardy, and he was a Revolutionary soldier. His record is accessible. John Henry Clardy, the father of John Bradford Clardy. There's another person. You have so many Revolutionary War soldiers in your ancestry. You're eligible to join the SAR and the DAR under John Henry Clardy. And his wife was a woman named Bullington was her last name. And John Henry Clardy was in the 7th Virginia Regiment in the Revolutionary War. So I won't give you all of his information. If you really are interested, you can go find it pretty easy. And if you need some help, let me know. John Henry Clardy married his cousin, Mary Clardy. Her father was Benjamin Clardy, who married Agnes Booth. Okay, here's where we take off, so stay with me. I'm going to flip my chart over. Agnes Booth's family is where we want to take a look right now. And we do know one more generation on the Clardies, but we'll let that lay right now because I can't verify anything beyond that. Early 1700s Virginia, we know that beyond that one or two generation, the first Clardy to come was Francois Cledieu, Frank Clardy. Let's go back to Agnes Booth Clardy. Agnes Booth Clardy was Delvin Morgan's sixth great grandmother. So you can just remember that. It's Delvin, and you can place yourself. If you're Delvin's child, it's your seventh great grandmother. And when I say Delvin, of course we're talking about the brothers and sisters, and I don't any of the family from Georgia. The reason I'm putting Delvin as a starting point is because that's my wife's grandfather. So plug in your mother or father, Delvin's brother and sister, and it's exactly the same thing. See, I'd like to meet all of you someday. I came to Uncle G's funeral. I was at Donna and I weren't married at that time, but I'm sure I met a lot of you many years ago when G passed. So when I'm saying Delvin, that's my starting point because of Donna, So plug in your mother or father there. So it's Delvin's sixth great grandmother. It's his children's seventh great grandmother. It's Donna's eighth great grandmother, 8 generations up. Great. You know how that goes. Agnes Booth's father was also a Revolutionary War soldier. There's 2 on this line. His name was John Booth. Now I know you're thinking, are we any kin to John Wilkes Booth, who shot President Lincoln? That's a good question. I haven't taken the time to study that, but I think it'd be fun to find out. Let me go, give me a few days to work on that and I'll see. But I can't answer that. But John Booth was a Revolutionary War soldier. He was born in 1735 in Virginia. He married Mary Smith. She's got a pretty interesting line too, which I'm not going into the Smith line today, but you can find lots of things on them. Back to the Booths. John Booth's father was Thomas Booth, and his wife was Elizabeth Cobbs. We're getting closer and closer to Williamsburg and Jamestown. Thomas Booth's father was George Booth, and he married Amy Malone. Amy Malone's father was Nathaniel Malone. He was born in 1671 in Ireland, of course, with a name like Malone. He married a woman named Mary Wynn. Nathaniel Malone came to the New World, into Virginia, came to Williamsburg, met this girl named Mary Wynn, who was the daughter of Captain Thomas Wynn and Agnes Tucker Stith. The Stiths, if you Google John Stith and Jane Mosby, you'll get a lot of information about the Stiths in colonial Virginia, and specifically Williamsburg and farther back. So Mary Wynn Malone's father was Captain Thomas Wynn. His father was Robert Wynn, and his mother was Mary Frances Sloman. Robert Wynn was a speaker of the House of Burgesses in Williamsburg. I'm going to put some pictures up on the Facebook group inside the House of Burgesses. If you've ever been to colonial Williamsburg and taken the tour, you've been in the House of Burgesses. This is where your ancestor, Robert Wynn, the 12th great-grandfather of Delvin Morgan, was Speaker of the House. Donna had several ancestors who were Burgesses. They were like members of Parliament. They were like members of the House of Representatives in our government. They ran the government of the new colony. And he was Speaker for a while. Donna had several ancestors who were in the House of Burgesses. I did too. Our families had to know each other. They lived close to each other. They sometimes intermarried back then, and they both served in the House of Burgesses. We both had ancestors who went to, both of our families went to Bruton Parish Church. And some of you, Donna gave some of you one year for Christmas some candles that had burned in Bruton Parish Church and a little bit of a history about your family connection to Bruton Parish Church. It's very, very strong. You have a lot of ancestors buried in the cemetery at Bruton Parish Church in Williamsburg. If you've never been to Williamsburg, you need to go see where your family lived and to go visit their graves at Bruton Parish. They'll let you ring the bell if you get there at the right time. They have service every day around noon. You can go for church. And if you say, I'm a descendant of so-and-so who's buried here, they'll let you ring the bell and they'll give you a little commemorative card to say, I rang the bell for my ancestor at Bruton Parish Church. Kind of fun to do. But Robert Wynn was Speaker of the House of Burgesses in Williamsburg, Virginia. And there's a lot about him. Again, you Google him and you'll find it. Let's back up again. We're going to go back down the line to 8th great-grandparents, Thomas Booth and Elizabeth Cobbs. Elizabeth Cobb's father was Thomas Cobb, born in 1689 in Virginia. And he married Mary Shields, born in 1692. Mary Shields' father was James Shields, born in 1670 in Virginia. He died in 1726. You may have heard that name, Shields. If you go to Williamsburg today, you can eat in the Shields Tavern. He was one of the tavern keepers in colonial Virginia. Go online at Shields Tavern. You can look at the menu, see what they have to eat today. It's been completely restored. It is the same building. It's got quite a few cosmetic changes, but some of it is still original and the outside is restored authentically. And again, I'll put some pictures up on the Facebook group and you can see what your ancestors' tavern, Shields Tavern, looks like. James Shields was a prominent citizen in Williamsburg, Virginia. He married Hannah Marot. Some people pronounced it Marot, M-A-R-O-T. It's French name, Marot. A lot of French Protestants left Europe and came to Virginia and South Carolina too, which is not your family, but the French Protestants went to several areas. They went to Canada, Virginia, South Carolina, and eventually to what's now Louisiana, French territory there. But James Shields' father was William Shields, born in 1630, and his mother was Elizabeth Bray. They were, of course, from England. Hannah Marot was born in 1660 in Williamsburg. Her father was Jean Marot, John Marot, we would say. And her mother was Anne Pasteur. The Marot family were very prominent also in Williamsburg. You can find a lot about them. And so were the Pasteurs. Anne Pasteur's father was Jean Pasteur. Her mother's name was Mary. We do not know Mary's last name. Jean Pasteur was Delvin Morgan's 12th great-grandmother, and Jean Pasteur was a wig maker. There were about a dozen wig makers at one time in colonial Williamsburg. And again, if you ever go take the tour up there, or if you've been to the wig maker's shop. The one that's open in Williamsburg is the Charlton family wig maker, the Charlton wig shop. But Pasteur's was not far from there. And if you go to Charlton's, it's exactly how Jean Pasteur made wigs. The French were famous for their wigs. And so it was the French Protestants in Williamsburg who made the wigs, and they were called perruques. They were peruque makers in colonial times. The men wore wigs for a couple of reasons. The practical reason was you didn't take baths and wash your hair all the time. It was a big deal to take a bath. You couldn't just go turn on the spigot and have a hot water heater and have a shower. There was no such thing. And to take a bath, especially if it was cold weather, you had to heat water, use precious wood, heat your water, fill a tub. It took hours and hours and hours. Everybody took a bath in the same water. You couldn't waste it. That's where the thing about everybody taking a bath on Saturday night came in. When people took baths, the whole family used the same bath water, and you started with the dad, and he took it first, and then mom, and then the kids. And that the water got so dirty that when Junior had his bath toward the end, if he slipped under the water, you couldn't see him. And that's where the saying, "Don't throw the baby out with the bath water," came from. But people didn't take baths every week. They took them every few months, and they powdered up and perfumed up and deodorized the best way they could, but they still smelled bad. But you do the best you can. But your hair, you can't wash your hair all the time, and they didn't think it was healthy to do that, and your hair would get nasty. Your hair will stink if you hadn't washed it in a few days. And so the wigs covered that up, and they'd get fleas or lice in there. It kept you from getting fleas and lice in your hair. They had a lot of animals around. Things were not real sanitary, even in a high-class place like Williamsburg. It was still what it was. So the peruke maker served a purpose for those who could afford the wigs. You kept some of that out of your hair. You covered up the bad smell and covered up the bad look. Some of it was, excuse me, I hit the mic. Some of it was pride. And so, and some of it was prestige. The type of wig you wore had a meaning. That's why you see all of the people in Parliament wearing the powdered wigs. The powder kept the fleas away. It was a practical purpose. But they were ceremonial too. You still see them in the Parliament today. A lot of times, if you watch the Parliament on TV, you'll see the Speaker of the House of Parliament in London wearing the wig, justices wearing wigs. French always wore them. So it was just a European custom that had a practical side and a ceremonial side. So the wig makers were extremely important, especially because the House of Burgesses was in Williamsburg and they needed them. But people wore them to galas and parties. The governor lived in Williamsburg, and if you went to a party at his house, you'd wear your nicest wig. The wig makers were extremely important. They were the formal attire people, peruke makers. So your ancestor, Jean Pasteur, was a peruke maker. Let's back up and take a look at another line. We've looked at Robert Wynn, the House of Burgesses speaker. Let's go back to the Cobb family. If we go back to Thomas Booth and Elizabeth Cobb's 8th great-grandparents, and Elizabeth's father was Thomas Cobb's and Mary Shields, just like we said. We just went off to the Shields, to Shields Tavern. Now let's go from the Thomas Cobb's to his line, which is Ambrose Cobb's. If you Google Ambrose Cobb's, you'll get a lot of hits. And there were several generations named Ambrose Cobb's, so you have to make sure you know which one you're reading about. But Thomas Cobb's father, Ambrose Cobb's, is prominently featured in Bruton Parish Church because he was a vestryman. The vestry in the Anglican Church is like the church board, the church government. The Presbyterians call them the session. They're the men who run the church and make the decisions. Are we going to build a church? Are we going to buy something for the church? How much are we going to pay the pastor, the minister? That's what the vestry is in the Anglican Church. And of course, Bruton Parish Church was an Anglican church. Your ancestors were Anglicans. And so Ambrose Cobb's, his name is inscribed on a lot of plaques inside Bruton Parish. He's buried, and his family are buried at Bruton Parish in the cemetery. I'm going to put a picture up on the Facebook group of the area where Ambrose Cobb's grave is known to be. He does not have a headstone, but they do know the area because of the church records. He married a woman named Frances Elizabeth Pinkett, who was born in 1666. Ambrose was born in 1672 and died in 1718. His father was Robert Cobb's, and he was the immigrant who came from England. Robert Cobb's married Elizabeth Thorpe, and Robert Cobb's father was named Ambrose Cobb's also. He, Robert's son Ambrose, he named him for his dad. So Ambrose Cobb's married a woman named Anne White. Anne White's line will take you to another important family you're related to called the Hunts. Reverend Robert Hunt was the first pastor in the New World. He came with the settlers at Jamestown, Virginia. He is buried in the chancel of the first church founded at Jamestown. I'll put some pictures up on the Facebook group of where that is in Jamestown. If you've ever been to Jamestown, you've seen the archaeological excavations of where the first church was. There's nothing there but a little bit of a rock foundation, and then there's some crosses where the chancel of the church used to be. And there were 4 graves discovered there a few years ago. One of them was Reverend Robert Hunt. He's your uncle. You are descended from Robert Hunt's sister, Angelica Hunt. I'm not going into all of the lines, but I can sit down and show it to you. So that's extremely big. This was the first English settlement in the New World, 1607. Robert Hunt came with them. There were other Hunt lines that came and went from Jamestown. Robert Hunt, I think, had to go back to England for a while because he was sick. Some of the Hunts did. You also have a line, 2 or 3 other lines that go back to Jamestown. You are eligible to join the Jamestown Society, which is made up of people who can prove that they are descended from the original settlers. And what they call original are the English settlers and others who came during the first 50 years of Jamestown, from 1607 to 1657. You're eligible to join the Jamestown Society, and you have many ancestors who came to Jamestown during that time. After the 1650s, Jamestown shrank in significance, and Williamsburg became the capital of the colony and grew. The governor's mansion was built there. The city grew. People moved inland away from Jamestown, and it shrank in importance by the 1650s. So those are some of your ancestors. Let me back up and give you 2 more. I've blown your mind here. Let me go back to Agnes Booth Clardy. And then I want to go to John Ferris. There's that Ferris name again. Your 6th great-grandfather was John Ferris, who married Anne Rogers. John Ferris was born in 1737 in Virginia. His father was Robert Ferris. His mother was Judith Johnston. Judith Johnston's father was Sir William Johnston. When you have a sir in front of your name, that means you've been knighted. So he obviously had been knighted by the monarch. Sir William Johnston married Anne Mary Chew, C-H-E-W. Anne Mary Chew's father was Larkin Chew. Larkin Chew was a Burgess of the House of Burgesses in Williamsburg, Virginia. I told you had more than one. Larkin Chew married Hannah Roy. Larkin Chew's father was Joseph Chew, who married Ruth Larkin. Joseph Chew was Colonel John Chew, who married Sarah Gale Bond. John Chew came to Jamestown. I believe he came in 1608, if I remember correctly, a year after the permanent founding. And he was also a member of the original House of Burgesses in Jamestown, Virginia. So there are the Chews. There's a whole lot more to tell you. There's just no time. The Cobbs, the Hunts, the Winds, the Moreaus, the Pasteurs, the Shields, the Clardies. I've just scratched the surface, and it's nearly 50 minutes. I guess I need to stop. But let me look down here on this list and make sure I hadn't left out anything that I just think you have to know. Your family has been in America for over 400 years. And that's something to be proud of, hadn't always been good, everything they did, hadn't always been what you might be proud of, but their tenacity and their strength and their endurance is really something to be proud of. And some of them had an amazing contribution to the founding of this country. Don't let anybody erase your history. Don't let anybody make you ashamed of your history. You don't have to condone everything your ancestors did. You don't have to say they were perfect. They were not. But most of these people were God-fearing people who practiced what they preached. They were products of their time. They lived in the time and in the realm in which they were born, just like we do today. So don't let anyone diminish your heritage. It's a good heritage. It's a rich heritage. Well, if I go back and think that I left something important out, I'll do an addendum like I did on the Nicholsons, a quick one. But I think that's enough, and I sure have enjoyed it. I didn't know how in the world I was going to present such a huge package of information, but I hope you got a little something out of it, and I hope all of you are staying well, and appreciate all of you. Pray for us, and we'll pray for you. Y'all have a really good week. Bye now.